Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with FigureItOut Productions. The following video is part of our Quick Shoot series.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and I got a package. This comes from a website called retrotowers.co.uk. If that sounds familiar, I used to order a lot of stuff from them a few years ago. I did a lot of videos from stuff I got from them. The thing is, they stopped making new versions of the thing I was ordering, and you know what, fuck it, that's just kind of the lid. Let me open it up and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So inside we have their card for retrotowers.co.uk, and we have the device itself, an Everdrive. Now, if you're not familiar with what an Everdrive is, I'm going to give you a quick crash course here. Now, an Everdrive is, think of any cartridge-based console that you're familiar with, the N64, the Super Nintendo, you know, etc. Sega Genesis, Master System, whatever. They all have, obviously they use cartridges, and an Everdrive is essentially a cartridge that also has an SD card slot in it. You can load that SD card with ROMs, and then when you put that into the cartridge, you can pop the cartridge into the console and basically play every single game ever made for that particular console. It's something that would have been like a 90s wet dream when you were a little kid, you know, but now it's actually real. Now, I've done videos on a lot of these things over the years. I mean, go ahead and check it out. I mean, I don't remember them all off the top of my head, but I got a lot of them from retrotowers.co.uk, so I built up a lot of goodwill with them. So I actually worked out a deal with them for you guys. If you're interested in ordering this, or frankly anything else, I got you guys 5% off. You can use my name as a coupon code right there. I'll just display it. Click on the link in the description, go there, put in an order, 5% off by using my name. You're welcome. But yeah, so with the concept of Everdrives, a lot of people get confused and think, oh, they must be like emulation or something. It's like, no, the easiest way to explain this is that when you have any regular cartridge for a console, it's essentially just a cartridge and there's just one ROM on it. The difference with the Everdrive is it's a console where it just simply lets you or a cartridge where it just simply lets you change that ROM at any time. It's pretty much as easy as it gets right there. So this one in particular is for the Game Boy Advance. Now you would think that this would have come out a long time ago, but I don't know why it didn't, but it didn't. It was in high demand, but only now is it finally coming out. And I want to give a shout out to a guy named Krix. He's the guy, he's in Ukraine, and he's the dude who is responsible for all these things. The guy's obviously a genius. I mean, he's made Everdrives for like every cartridge console. Or not literally everyone, but the vast, vast majority. And this was probably the most in-demand one that had not been released yet. So very cool. So just taking a look at it, it's got a nice sticker on it, it's got a nice shell on it and everything, a nice slot as well for the micro SD card. That's what it uses specifically, is micro SD. This is the X5 version. Now there's also an X3 version and an X7 version, and if you're going to ask me what the difference is, I don't know. I just know the X7 version has more features and the X3 has less features. But beyond that, I'm not sure. So obviously the point here is that I'm going to try this thing out and see what I can learn about it.
Time to give you guys a couple of technical notes here. When I first turned it on with ROMs in it, this is what it showed me. Basically, it gives you instructions. You have to go to that website and download that file and then throw it into a folder. It's basically the operating system. So I went ahead and I did that, and once I got that to work, I decided to test around with different types of ROMs, including Game Boy and Game Boy Color, and they would not load, and it kept presenting this screen that you're seeing. So once again, I did exactly what it said. I Googled it, and then I was able to find that particular file, and then at that point I was pretty much up and running. So obviously you're seeing that stuff on the actual Game Boy hardware. We'll talk more about that in a bit. So the footage you're seeing here comes from the GameCube through the Game Boy Advance player. Now you can see all these different folders on there. The TurboGrafx 16 has nothing to do with this. That's just a folder that I have for, because I basically share this SD card. However, all the other ones, you see the one that says ROMs and all that, all those games can be played on here. So if you go in this folder, this is the GBA OS folder. If you have Goomba on there, it'll play Game Boy and Game Boy Color. If you have PocketNES.GBA, it will play NES games. If you have SMSAdvance.GBA, it'll play Game Gear and Sega Master System games, both of which are a really nice bonus. Basically, they're just emulators for those consoles to run on the Game Boy Advance, and that's how they were made originally. But yeah, you can actually run them on the Everdrive now, which is kind of cool. So yeah, so any one of these consoles, again, except for the TurboGrafx 16, you can run games with. Now, obviously, you'll have to go and find your own ROMs. That's not necessarily legal to give out that information, so that's on you. But it's honestly, dude, it's not that hard. Now, I was testing various things, like what this thing was capable of playing. I don't remember if the Game Boy Advance had region coding built in, but for the purposes of testing, I grabbed a Japanese game and I grabbed a European game. Both of them worked just fine, so I didn't have any problems with that. But as you can see, there's just a giant list of games here. And all you really do is you go up to any one of your choosing and you click on it and you tell it to load. And then, you're on your way. Now, there's a lot of different options in there, as you might have noticed. Like just things to see, like details about the ROM and all that kind of stuff. It was also nicely organized. I did that. Everybody should understand, when you buy this thing, it doesn't come with an SD card full of games. You have to do that part. And how you do it is up to you, like what your method of organization is. If you want to throw every game ever made in there, if you want to be more selective, whatever, that's entirely up to you. Now, obviously, I chose to run Sonic Advance for the Game Boy Advance just to test it out. It obviously works. There was no problems with that. In case you're wondering, I won't be showing any Nintendo intellectual property, no Marios or Zeldas or anything like that in this video, just because, again, I don't feel like getting a strike from Nintendo just because they don't like people advertising their products. Even though technically this isn't theirs, but you get my point. Whereas all these other companies don't really care. But trust me, those games do work. I just can't show them to you. Did you guys ever play Sonic Advance? Sonic Advance was always like the heartbreaker game for me because it was so, it was so similar to all the Genesis ones. But I think it was like the first Sonic game to not be on any type of Sega hardware. I think the first release on a different console, aside from Sonic Pocket for the Neo Geo, or the Neo Geo Pocket, I guess that would count, wouldn't it? Ignoring that one, I guess the first release was Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, but this was the first Sonic release in a post-Sega hardware world, at least as far as I recall. So playing this game was always kind of bittersweet. And it was also available on the N-Gage as Sonic N. I think that was a slightly improved version, although I don't think anybody's ever really played that one. But yeah, no, ultimately it was a pretty cool game, but that's not really the point, is it? It's just to show you that the games do work, and it works pretty well. And you also got to see, just for the hell of it, you got to see me beat Act 1 of Sonic Advance, although I'll be showing you shorter clips from other things. Now, going back to the main menu, on the GameCube, that's as simple as just hitting reset. When you do that, it comes back to this menu. It reloads the cartridge. And so I'm just skipping some stuff here. So I went ahead and I loaded up a random Game Boy Color game. I picked Godzilla the game, or Godzilla the series. You remember that terrible Roland Emmerich movie? They gave that series, they gave that movie a cartoon series, and the cartoon series actually wasn't that bad. Yeah, so they gave it a couple of games on the Game Boy Color. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, this was the first time I ever tried to play one of these games. And it was, without a doubt, one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had in a video game, because I just think it was like, I don't know who the fuck published this. Look at this. First of all, he's all glitching out and shit, and I don't think that's the Everdrive. I don't own this game, so I couldn't test. The other Game Boy Color games I tested didn't do this. And at the same time, that's a fixed walking movement. Like, you're not controlling it. All you can do is weave his head up and down and kind of shoot stuff. That's the game. It was hilariously bad. I was sitting there just in tears laughing when I first played this. At least for a couple of minutes there. That was just so funny. I couldn't believe that this was actually like released as anything other than not even a functional tech demo. I mean, look at him. He's like, part of his body is like vanishing. Whatever. Anyway, point is, it works. So popping in an original Game Boy game, which again, it runs those just fine. In both cases, again, Game Boy Color and Game Boy Original, you have to have that Goomba file installed. Again, you can find that by just Googling it. Now, I decided to run Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie, which was one of the Game Boy games that they enhanced a little bit for the Super Game Boy. That's why it has like that custom background on there, and I guess I didn't know this, but I guess they transferred it over. So the movie game, we're going to fight you to choose your level, kind of like Mega Man a little bit. And we're going to play against the pig guy. I'm just jumping ahead to the end when you actually do the boss fight. Remember the pig guy from the movie who wasn't in any episode of the show ever and didn't do anything in the movie? This is much more interesting, and all you do is just walk and punch him. I loved this game as a kid, even though obviously it doesn't really hold up that well, but it was a lot of fun. It was one of the few like Game Boy games I like really got into. As you guys know, I'm not huge into handhelds, but there are some games out there I just had a blast with. But yeah, so that's not the point of the video. Again, it's just to show you that the Game Boy stuff does work. And yeah, there you go. So now we're going to pop in something a little bit different. We're going to test out one of these emulators. Yes, I think that'd be kind of cool. So we're running the NES emulator. This is Mega Man. This is the straight up Mega Man ROM for the NES running on the Game Boy Advance Everdrive, running on the GameCube. Get your mind around that. But this is obviously not the ideal way to play. If you were going to sit down at your television, you're like, hey, I want to play Mega Man. This is probably not the best way, but it does work. Again, I only did this for the purposes of capturing footage. I thought it'd beat, the idea of aiming a camera at my Game Boy Advance screen and showing you that it works. You have to remember that this is a handheld console or a portable device, and that's how you're going to want to just think about it. So you would be able to play Mega Man on your Game Boy Advance on a cartridge using this device if you want to. Switching over again, we're going to show off a little bit of the Sega Master System. This is Phantasy Star. Obviously a big Sega franchise, even to this day. It's one of the few Sega franchises that's still around where they actually make anything for it. And it actually makes them some money, so good on them. But I guess this is the one that all started. This is where it all started with the Phantasy Star series. One of the few games that anybody really remembers the Master System for, at least in the West. This is one of the big games that they wanted. This was, I guess, Sega's answer to all the Final Fantasy stuff and all these other RPGs. And Legend of Zelda a little bit, because RPGs and those kinds of things were doing really well for Nintendo, and Sega wanted some of that action. So they came up with Phantasy Star. And I personally, you guys know me, I'm not super into RPGs, so I never really saw it. But I will tell you this, because I tried these games both on the handheld device and on the television. Now, I have to give a full disclaimer that my Game Boy Advance has been, the one I use, it has a modified LCD screen, so it looks way the fuck better. But it looks way better on that screen than it does on the television. It just does. And finally here, we're going to pop in a Game Gear game. In case you're curious why it can run both Game Gear and Sega Master System games, it's because if you successfully build a Game Gear or Sega Master System emulator, you essentially get both consoles because they're basically the same machine, plus or minus a couple of quirks. So years ago, people managed to get both of basically get them running on Game Boy Advance hardware. It's just now that we have the Everdrive, you can actually run the emulator on the Everdrive, which is just... There's so many levels of complicated and weird that goes into that. But yeah, this game is Sonic Drift 2. This was released in the West, even though Sonic Drift 1 never was. That was only released in Japan. But yeah, this is a Game Gear exclusive Sonic game, although I guess it was re-released on those like Sonic compilation discs, wasn't it? But originally it was just a Game Gear exclusive. Honestly, not a very good racing game. You'll notice the draw distance. It's really hard to anticipate when to turn. So it has that map up on top. I found myself looking at that map a lot so that I would know when to turn. Otherwise, you just drive onto the grass. But then you're not looking at your driving, are you? Anyway, let's talk about some more technical stuff. Your SD card can be up to 64 gigabytes. It has to be formatted to FAT32. If you go to Crix.com, you'll find all this information on there. It's just, you should double check that before you do anything. You'll also find all the operating system stuff there as well. As for what it's compatible with, it's compatible with the GameCube, the original stock Game Boy Advance, the Game Boy Advance SP. Now, I don't own a micro, so I couldn't test that, but I'm assuming it works. It does actually work with the DS. Now, the interesting thing about that is that the DS and the Micro didn't originally support Game Boy or Game Boy Color games, just Game Boy Advance. But because this thing technically uses an emulator to run Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, and I guess that was a hardware like necessity, you couldn't actually build one that natively supported all hardware from all three. I don't understand why, but I know there was some explanation behind that. Because of that, it actually, the DS anyway, is definitely capable of running original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, as well as the other stuff, which is pretty cool. So this is my Game Boy Advance. This is the LCD modded one. I did a video on it. Highly recommend you check it out. And in this footage, I was just testing to make sure that imports worked, and they do. There was a Pinky and the Brain game exclusively in Europe. How cool is that? But yeah, the screen on this thing is unreal, man. I know that the camera doesn't do it justice at all, but trust me, it's absolutely awesome. But yeah, man, overall, this thing is awesome. It's neat conceptually to have all these portable games on this one device. Granted, 2 of them are home consoles, but even so, it's just awesome to be able to do that. I know a lot of people will point out, like, dude, you buy a lot of video games. Are you sure you would want to do something like this? Yeah. I like to leave my collection intact when I can. So if I want to play a game, it's nice to have an Everdrive so that I can play it on there instead and leave the collection alone. I know that's not everybody's standpoint, but it is nice when you have that option. And I know there's a lot of people that would get it for other reasons, but in my case, I could play it on the handheld, or I could play it on the GameCube on my television, which is absolutely great. So overall, highly recommended. I suggest if you want it, go to retrotowers.co.uk, use my name as a coupon code, get yourself 5% off. Little bonus thing you might not have noticed about this is when the console or the Game Boy is reading it, there will be like a little light that will pop in on the GameCube, or sorry, on the cartridge itself, which it should do anytime now. There you go. Anyway, that's it, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you all later.